The event tonight, the Fireside Chat, was titled "The Fight for School Choice," which I think was very fitting. We really are in a battle for the future of our kids. It's a battle for educational opportunity and a battle against radical indoctrination of our students. And there is nobody that has, I think, contributed to this more than the folks that we have sitting up here. And so I think that it's tempting a lot of the times to feel like we're sort of overwhelmed with kind of the insanity from the left, the opposition, and everything that they're pushing for us. But I would say that we are winning this fight, and I think nothing shows that more clearly than the success that we've had here in Arizona. A decade ago, things like ESAs were just a policy proposal coming out of the Institute, and now, thanks to the work of folks in this room, ESAs have now been passed, education savings accounts in Arizona, the strongest bill in the country. We have universal school choice, and now we have governors and lawmakers across the country all who are all lining up now to advance these same pillars of education freedom that we've helped pioneer here at the Institute, ESAs and academic transparency, to make sure that every kid has the access to the best school of their choice, and that every parent knows what's being taught in their public schools, so that things like critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and radical gender theory are not slipping into lesson plans and curricula while parents are left in the dark. So I have the privilege of introducing two individuals tonight who have been leaders in this movement for parents and students with impacts at both the state and national level. Of course, former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, and our president here at the Goldwater Institute, Victor Riches. Victor, as many of you know, has been an architect of many of the great policy successes here in Arizona, serving both as the Chief of Staff for the Arizona State Senate and the House of Representatives, and also as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Ducey. And of course, speaking with Victor tonight, she needs no introduction, but certainly warrants a very warm one. Former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos served as the 11th Secretary, has been a champion for schools and students for 30 years, and though I have it on good authority from the radical leftists on Twitter that I think she hates children or eats them or something terrible, she's somebody who has dedicated her life to kids, working with at-risk students in the public school system in Michigan, serving as the chair for the American Federation for Children, being involved with leading organizations like the American Enterprise Institute, and then obviously working in the belly of the beast for 4 years, helping to undo some of the assaults on students on due process that happened during the Obama administration. And really, I don't think that her impact can be overstated. So, I think when it comes to picking teams, I'm very glad that we have Betsy DeVos and that the left is stuck with Randy Weingarten and the teachers' unions. But with that, I just want to thank you all again for coming, and please extend a very warm welcome, Secretary DeVos and Victor.
When I was reading your book, you talked about how you spent 30 years working on education, freedom issues, well before you were in charge of the education department. And I think it would be very interesting for everyone here to just hear a little bit about where that passion came from to work on education reform.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Victor and Matt. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And please call me Betsy. I ask everybody to do that. I'm not secretary anymore. I was always uncomfortable even being called secretary whilst being secretary. So anyway, it's great to be with you tonight, and thank you all for the very warm welcome. And so many of you I had a chance to chat with before. But just to give you a little idea about where the passion came from, and Dick, my husband, and I knew we were going to be able to send our children to wherever we thought was best for them because we could afford to do it. And that wasn't even a consideration for us. So I was looking around West Michigan to see what the options were, and I came across a little Christian school in the heart of Grand Rapids, in the heart of the city, that was serving kids in that immediate neighborhood. And it was founded by 4 students, former students of the college that I also attended. So I knew of them a little bit. But they had started it as an after-school program, and then there was so much demand, they finally started this school. And every year they had to raise 90% of the operating funds for the school from benefactors in the area. Well, I got involved there. Rick didn't end up going to that school for his elementary school years, but I got involved there as a volunteer. And the more I was involved, the more I realized there were, for every family that had children there, there were probably 10 or 20 other families in that vicinity that would have loved to have their children in a school like the Potter's House. And so as soon as Dick and I could help support kids to be able to go there, we did that. Then we started a scholarship program across the state of Michigan to help other families make those choices for their kids. And very soon I realized that we were going to, as much as we tried to make the argument that school choice was either a logical or an emotionally right argument, it was really the politics around it that were going to make the difference. And so that led me into really adding the political piece to what by that time was many years of work in trying to change policy at the state level for supporting families to make these choices for their kids. So that that has continued to build over 35 years now, and I must say that I've never been more optimistic about the future of education freedom. And I like to refer to it as education freedom because I think it helps us think more broadly about what education experiences could look like in the K-12 years. When we talk about schools, it's pretty much confined to buildings in our minds, isn't it? Everybody comes up with a picture of what that building looks like. But I'm familiar with a school in West Michigan that, an elementary school, an outdoor school where kids, even in the middle of the winter, and those of you who know Michigan know it's cold in the middle of the winter, the kids are outside all day, every day for their learning, and they love it, and they have a huge waiting list for kids to try to get into the school, and teachers who love to be there. I use it just as a small example of how we need to be thinking more expansively about what kids' learning experiences could be like with true education freedom. I'm thrilled to be in Arizona where there is now education freedom.
Well, thank you. And just to follow up a little bit on when you talked about all the years that you spent working on education freedom, you have a great quote in your book where you say, if we can respect and honor each other, we can live together without one-size-fits-all requirements from Washington. Now that doesn't seem like that should be a controversial statement, but as we've all seen today, the left seems to genuinely despise educational freedom, despise school choice. But the question I have for you, when you first started working on these endeavors, was the left as hostile towards these ideas as they are now, or has it gotten worse as time has gone on?
Well, I think their attacks have certainly sharpened up in recent years, but I can say from my experience in Michigan, the teachers union and their allies were as strong there as they have been any place in the country. And in fact, it's interesting to note that many of the leaders at the national level in the NEA and the AFT had their origins in the state of Michigan. And I'm not surprised about that. So I was used to, from early on in this battle, going head to head with the teachers unions and the status quo. And so it was not a surprise to me when I got to Washington how vicious they were and are. But I think it certainly surprised lots of people. But I think the intensity I probably underestimated a little bit. But that, yes, I think they have continued to strengthen their hold, certainly their hold on the Democrat Party and all of the elected officials within the party, when 99.7% of their funding, their political funding, goes to elected Democrats or Democrat candidates who, of course, promise to do their bidding, and it becomes just a vicious cycle. They ask for more money, they get more money, and then they give money to get more money. And it's all to the detriment of the kids whose focus education really should be on.
Well, you really highlighted something in your book that plays into that, and that is, at least in my opinion, you were pretty clearly one of the most accomplished members of President Trump's cabinet. But despite that, it's right out of the gate, the media and the left seem to target you as being public enemy number one in the entire administration. And you mentioned that you weren't surprised by the attacks, but did the level of vitriol, at least during the confirmation hearings, was that at all surprising, let alone then what happened once you became in charge of the department?
It was somewhat surprising, but again, I think I was not surprised by the way they tried to marginalize me and attack me at every turn, because I had experiences with the unions in a variety of states, and I knew that what I was there to advocate for kids was antithetical to what they actually are there for, and so I knew it was going to be hard from the start. But I think they've continued to overplay their hand at every single step, as we've seen in the last 2 years in particular. And I think, and thankfully, a lot more parents and grandparents and friends and neighbors have awakened to what their agenda has really been. And it is an all-encompassing agenda that entails a lot of curriculum that is antithetical to most families' desires for their kids. And so that again, I think is a really silver lining to what we've been through the last couple of years, is that awakening that is calling into question on the part of people who never before COVID, I know lots of, anecdotally, and I'm sure you all do as well, lots of families who really awakened to the fact that the schools they thought were doing a good job for their children actually weren't, and in many cases were, doing things totally contrary to what a family or what parents would wish for their children. So again, like I said, I'm very optimistic about where we go from here. And Arizona has really set the bar high for a lot of other states to really emulate and follow with the implementation of a universal education savings account. This is a real game changer. And as your governor has stated so well, it's sort of like the many attempts to break the 4-minute mile that happened over many years, and once that record was broken, or once that barrier was broken, how many others followed suit very quickly. And I think that's what we have in store for education freedom when we consider the ground that Arizona has now broken. Yes, good for Arizona.
Yeah, I've always felt that to the extent that there's any silver lining when something horrible like COVID occurs, it did seem like it opened up a lot of parents' eyes to just things, not only things that were being taught or not taught in the classroom, but also just the lack of care that the school districts themselves actually had for our students. In fact, the head of the education union out here at one point said, we're not going to return to the classrooms until COVID is eradicated. Not just get it under control, it has to be, and this is at a time when everyone else is going back to work. And so I guess just the question for you is, how much of a role did you think that unfortunate pandemic played in really opening up parents' eyes to what was really going on in their classrooms?
Oh, I think it played a huge role. Parents had front row seats to see how their child's school handled the situation, and in so many cases it was a fail. Whether it was a lack of rigor in a distance learning environment, a lack of expectation, or whether it was curriculum that you saw up front and personal on your kitchen table via Zoom that you had big objections to. Any variety of or any combination of those things, parents really were awakened to what was going on in a way that they hadn't been before. And And that has really started to build momentum around the kind of policy change that needs to happen, and that, frankly, again, Arizona's been the leader on, and can help push some others over the finish line with supporting those kinds of policies. But then, of course, the key is once you have the policy, how do you actually help grow it and build on it and encourage families to actually utilize education savings accounts and see different kinds of learning environments start to take shape that hadn't been before. And again, I think Arizona is a great example of how, out of necessity, many families decided to do things during the pandemic because their schools were failing their children so miserably, starting up, whether they're learning pods or micro schools or a 21st century one-room schoolhouse type approach, or whatever you want to characterize these creative experiments that families now have figured out are working pretty well for their kids, and they don't want to give them up. In fact, they want to build on them, and there's lots more demand for them. So that is another really great reason for the significance of the education savings account policy that's been passed and implemented here, because this education savings account provides so much flexibility for families to make those decisions. And I was talking with one of the gentlemen in the reception beforehand about one of the, again, a kind of a hybrid homeschool, and then in a classroom or small group setting 1 or 2 days a week. And right now they're charging a pretty nominal amount for that experience. Well, all of those kinds of experiences can be supported and grown through the education savings account approach here, and that's going to be great. That's going to be awesome for kids to have those different options grown and explored in new ways.
One of the things that we found out here is that the process of incrementalism can be extremely effective when promoting school choice. And when we first developed ESAs, we started it with special needs students, and then a year or two later, we added it to children in failing schools, then military families, kids on reservations, et cetera. And so it really created some momentum to run full-blown universal school choice, because of course every time we would run a bill, the other side would say, well, the sky is going to fall, our education system is going to be destroyed, and we kept adding more students in, and of course the only results we saw were positive results. Have you experienced that in other states as an effective way to push for school choice and school reforms in general? And also, do you find sometimes that maybe even folks on our own side, sometimes they maybe try to take too big of a bite right out of the gate, and they end up not getting much at all?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with what a former late Michigander acquaintance of mine talked about and developed, the Overton window of political possibility. And every state is going to have a slightly different dynamic in that regard, but I think that the steps that Arizona took out of necessity, because that window of political possibility was open only for that incremental step, that I think is different today in many cases and in many places because of the last 2 years' experience that families have had. And I think that states that are considering policies that will expand education freedom need to go as far and as big as they possibly can today, while that window is open in ways that it has never been before. I would reference Florida as having been another state that has moved incrementally in the direction of education freedom. And from Jeb Bush during his governorship, implementing the first statewide program there, and then, during his term in office, and then successive Republican governors there, and strong legislatures building on and expanding those opportunities through a variety of programs, where today, Florida has probably the longest, most expansive education freedom environment as compared to other states. But they have now another step to take. They can sort of benchmark against Arizona's universal program, and I'm guessing that Governor DeSantis is going to look real carefully at that and say we've got to take that next step. And they have multiple different programs, and their next right step will probably be to sort of streamline and simplify a lot of those programs into one that is easily understood and easily accessed by currently 85% of the kids in that state could take advantage of one of those programs. So they're pretty close to 100%, but simplifying what they have and strengthening that would be a really good and important step there.
One of the things that I really appreciated about your tenure at the department was that you had the unique intellectual courage and consistency to actually argue for less money from Congress for federal education spending. Probably the first secretary to ever do so. And of course, Congress refused to acquiesce to your request. But in your experience working in your time out there, where you would have to meet with these Washington politicians on a regular basis, do these folks really believe that the federal government knows best when it comes to education policy? Or is it political expediency? Or is it maybe that they just don't want to relinquish any more power to the states, particularly when it comes to funding issues?
Well, I think there are a lot of Republican members of Congress who in their heart know that the federal role in education has expanded way beyond the place that it should be. But there hasn't been a real good, there hasn't been a real good case to be made, a coherent case that's been made federally to put any political capital into trying to scale that back. And I think about the budgets that we presented that did reduce the amount of spending, and how many different patrons there were for the various programs, and a lot of them have very little time to think about any specific agency's budget, much less details within that budget. But I think again, today we are in a very different place today than we were 5 years ago, because of the exposure of the failings of the system during the pandemic. And so I do have some level of optimism that we will have more vocal leadership step up around and push on and question the role of the Department of Education. I, for one, think that the department should not exist. It was a political payoff when Jimmy Carter ran for president in '76, and it was the first time the teachers' unions endorsed a presidential candidate, and the payoff was to form a federal education agency. Even his head of HEW at the time, Joe Califano, said it was a bad idea, that this is a role for the states. And it's proven to be a bad idea, because the mission of the department was to close the achievement gap. We've spent over $1 trillion at the federal level alone to close achievement gaps. Not only have the achievement gaps not narrowed one little bit, by most measures they've actually widened. And all the department does is take the money appropriated by Congress, move it around within these big buildings with thousands of people, use up a bunch of it in doing so, and then spit it out to the states and local districts with all kinds of strings attached. They don't add value to anything having to do with a student and their experience of a quality K-12 education. And so I really think that there's every argument to be made that the federal government should stop doing what it's been doing through the department. And if Congress wants to keep appropriating money for education, send it to families directly and let them make the decisions to, enhance the education savings accounts in Arizona or wherever. But let the families make those decisions then, if they're, the targeted dollars are going to go to the families that need it most.
Looking back a little bit at your time in the Trump administration, what were the things that President Trump really got right when it comes to public education? And on the flip side, were there issues that he could have focused more on?
Well, he was the first presidential candidate that really openly advocated while he was campaigning for school choice. And that was attractive to me. And so he campaigned on it and he supported school choice, but education was not in his top 5 priorities of things to pay attention to and focus on while in office. So that was, on the one hand, that was advantageous for me because I had a lot of latitude from him to do the things that he wanted us to do. But on the other hand, we could have used a lot more of his championing, for example, the Education Freedom Scholarship bill that we advanced while in office would have established a federal tax credit to come alongside state programs to really enhance what every state that has a choice program was doing. And we got a lot of support and growing support for it, particularly as more legislators saw how dismally the system was performing. But if we had had that championing earlier on, we probably would have been in a further place today. So yeah, it would have been great if it was a higher priority for him. But I'm also appreciative of the fact that he actually openly supported it and did help advance it.
Sure. One of the big issues that we're working on at Goldwater is the idea of academic transparency, which of course you've been a huge supporter on. And basically this is just a way for parents to know exactly what's being taught in the classroom. And of course, as you know better than most, we've received a tremendous amount of opposition from unions all around the country in any state that we're working on this legislation in. But I find it kind of interesting because when I was a kid, which admittedly was quite a few years back, if my mom had asked my teacher, hey, can I just see the reading list in the classroom? Can I just see the curriculum in the classroom? I don't think there's any scenario in which the teacher didn't just give it to her. And so, and yet today that's just no longer the case. And so my question is, what has changed in public education to where teachers today, and certainly the school districts, but I think sadly even a lot of teachers, they actually look at the parents as almost being the enemies.
Yeah.
And what has changed to make that happen over the last couple of decades?
Well, I think it's been a progression, frankly, and it starts in the teachers' colleges where the new young teachers are learning and getting ready to enter the profession. And I think they are inculcated with this, with this notion that first of all, they know best, and then there's clearly a very agenda-driven, it's a very agenda-driven dynamic where it's very left-leaning and it's very antithetical, again, to many, many families. But I think this has all sort of come to fruition in a time and a way that was least expected or anticipated. And you know, the curriculums that we are objecting to today, this is not brand new. This has been developing, but it's been an intentional progression, again, over 2 or 3 decades that, you know, if we had had the kind of exposure that families had during the distance learning and lockdowns that we now have, you know, we now know of, I think there would have maybe been some earlier warning signals, but again, it has been kind of like the frog in the boiling, you know, in the boiling water, that it's gotten more and more and more intense as time has gone on. But it clearly is a very leftist, agenda-driven reality, and it has its sort of start in a lot of these experiences in teachers' colleges. And I'm really hopeful that, again, with introduction of education freedom policies in more and more states, that a lot of really great teachers who've gone to the sidelines because they've gotten frustrated by what their experience has been in a school system that just is going further and further away from their grounding or their tethering. I'm very hopeful that we're going to have a lot of educators come back into into the education world and really bring back a lot of the more grounded and academically focused realities, rather than a lot of these other non-academic focuses that we've seen way too much of. I just would mention, I had 2 specific roundtables while in office with teachers who'd been Teachers of the Year in their state or their local district, and who, after their year of recognition, had gone back to the classroom and then had quit very soon thereafter. And I wanted to know why. I had an inkling of why, but almost to a person, they said, you know, we were basically told, you've had your day in the sun, now get back in your classroom and get back in your box, and by the way, on be on page 24 on this day in this textbook. And they felt underappreciated, really like they could not actually add something more to their schools, when in fact they should. They should have opportunity to continue to develop themselves and their own careers, but they were underappreciated, and they felt basically frustrated and no longer wanting to submit to a system that didn't recognize or appreciate excellence. And that's what we've seen, again, part of that 2-3 decade progression, a lack of focus on rigor and excellence, and a continued focus on things that are non-academic and that are antithetical to most families' values in the country.
You talked about the questionable teachings going on in our colleges to people to prospective teachers. And I know you've also written a great deal about the importance of free speech on college campuses and the importance of students actually getting to hear contrary ideas, which interestingly enough seems to be the most painful thing for a lot of these students to hear. In this current nature, or in this current time of this woke culture that is just permeating every aspect of education, is it worse at the college level, or is it worse at the K-12 level, or does one sort of feed into the other?
Well, I think they feed into each other, and when kids in their K-12 years don't get the experience of healthy exchange of ideas and the ability to debate them, and even to be introduced to something that's contrary to what they might think might be their reality. This is a progression, and it's not a surprise that we're seeing what we are in colleges today because that's what they're getting from the K-12 experience. And you know, that dynamic, we've got to challenge that at every front, because our ability to be a functioning nation and competitive in the world is really dependent on how well we prepare the next generations to assume leadership. And I have to say, we have not done a very good job of the last couple of generations of students, and not to mention how many kids are lost because they simply drop out and you know, have no real future, both economically and personally. And so you know, this is a progression. It's not one or the other. That's you know, that's sort of propagating this reality. It is definitely a progression. The colleges and universities today are getting what is produced in K-12 education.
You know, I think in some ways it's easier to sort of fight back against these woke teachings when it comes to CRT or the 1619 project or these other questionable ideas in the K through 12 schools, because things like ESAs and school choice and charter schools and academic transparency. But it does seem like it may be a little harder to fight back against it in the universities. What are the things that groups like Goldwater and others should be thinking about to try to move the needle at that university level as well?
Well, I think a lot of Goldwater and other think tank organizations are doing a great job of helping to expose these really egregious examples of a lack of free speech, and the more, you know, the general population becomes aware of them, I think the more question is raised around the value of a four-year college experience. And I think there are a lot more people today between considering the cost of college and the value for that cost, and then what their kids are actually coming out with, you know, the other end of a four-year experience with the ideas that they have. Many parents are saying, let's take a step back and rethink this, and I think that's very good and healthy, and I hope that continues, because I do think higher education is headed for a real reset as well as K-12 education, and that will be good when that happens. We tried to help create a better environment for that to happen with some of the regulations around accreditation to really reduce the role of accreditors in their gatekeeping role, because when you think about it, accreditors are basically you know, the fox guarding the hen house, not really letting any new competition into the most marketplaces. So we changed that, and you know, the results of that will be more evident over time. But we also did another thing that I think is really helpful for prospective students, and that is adding information on a field of study basis to the college scorecard. So you can go and find out, if you're considering attending ASU, for example, you can find out, if I study in this particular major, here's what my salary is likely to be after I graduate. And every year data is supposed to be added to that, so you'll have a progressive look at what the value is of, or what you can expect to earn as a result of focusing in that particular field of study. It used to be for an institution, it was averaged out for the whole institution. Well, you know, there's a lot of degrees between, or a lot of variation between, say, an engineering student and perhaps psychology or an English major, I don't know, any other major. And so this is another important piece of information that can also help shape the future and what higher ed may look like.
No, thank you. I think we'll go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience. Who has a question for Betsy?
To get started, I just wanted to thank the Secretary for joining us tonight. And if you don't you need a copy of her book, we are selling them for $20 each at the registration desk to see my colleague Shannon. And we also have copies of a couple of reports related to a couple of issues they discussed tonight, education savings accounts and academic transparency. So if you want to know a little bit more about those issues, just pick up a copy of those reports. Please wait till I come to you with the microphone so we make sure everybody can hear your question clearly. And I think I had one back here to start.
Secretary, yesterday your former colleague, Mike Pompeo, said that Randy Weingarten, the president of the teachers union, was the most dangerous person in America.
Yeah.
Do you think he was being too easy on her?
I like that he has challenged her to a debate. I think that's awesome, and I'm really glad that his voice is in the march to resize or right-size the role of the teachers union and their allies in education. I do think that there's a real opportunity for, first of all, it's clear that a lot more Republicans have been very forthright about their support for school choice, education freedom than ever before. They're emboldened because that Overton window, that window of political possibility, has definitely shifted in their direction, and they can feel comfortable being there. But I also think there's a real likelihood that more and more Democrats are going to, particularly at varying state levels, are going to find themselves breaking away from that, 100% party rule over their position on this issue. Because education should not be a partisan issue. I mean, it should be the least partisan of the issues that we have to deal with. We are talking about the preparation of the future of our country, and the fact that it has been so politicized over the last half century, I would say, and it has been methodically so by the teachers union and all of their allies. And when you look at their, you need to look no further than their platforms to know that they have an agenda well beyond what's right and best for educating kids in their K-12 years. But it was great to see Mike's piece on that.
Okay, we have our next question back here.
Recently, they've exposed the unbelievable ratio of administrators to teachers and administrators to students, which to the common public was shocking news. And I think even recently, Hillsdale College put out a report that over some recent, maybe it was a decade, student population grew by 7%, teacher population grew by 8%, administrators grew by 87%. Yeah. Can you tell us what's going on?
Well, I mean, the system's continuing to expand its tentacles further and further into populations that are not core to teaching and core to educating. And, that's where the money has continued to go. It hasn't gone, primarily has not gone to teachers and compensating them for their work. It's gone in all of these other directions. And one of the provisions of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was passed during the second Obama administration and we had to implement when we came into office, one of the provisions was that down to every school building level, states are supposed to provide information as to where the education dollars go. And of course, every state will do it differently. Most states will obfuscate it in so many ways that it is totally useless information. In fact, I can't think of a state that has opened the coat to show exactly where all of the education dollars are going down to that school level in a way that would be meaningful for the average person looking to find these things. Which again is another commentary on why the federal role in education has greatly expanded beyond its where it should be.
Okay, I think our next question's right here.
Thank you. I first want to say thank you to Victor and the Institute for getting the ESA program passed. We have 2 kids on ESA this year, and we couldn't be more thankful.
Well, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. My question has to do, call me a cynic, but I'm sure the left is going to try to develop examples and reasons why ESA doesn't work and how it's harming kids. How important do you think it will be to develop, collect good data on how kids with ESAs are progressing to make sure we bat those arguments